Kroll recently published a survey of over 300 private equity executives about cybersecurity risk across their portfolios. Most of the findings are about what you'd expect. Cyber incidents are increasing, they cost money, and bigger funds spend more on defense. But the chart at the very end of this report inadvertently reveals that PE firms still don't know what they're doing in cyber and that the focus remains on compliance rather than real cyber defense. Let me share some highlights from the report. 80% of PE firms experienced some sort of cybersecurity disruption during the hold period in the last year. The average financial impact was about $2 million, and 13% of the firms reported losses above $5 million. 94% of respondents said they've absorbed some financial hit from cyber risk. Now, none of this is surprising, because if you're managing portfolio companies in 2026, you know cyber risk is real and that it's expensive. Kroll also found that larger firms, defined as those above $25 billion in assets under management, have stronger governance frameworks, use dedicated monitoring platforms, and enforce formal cybersecurity mandates across their portfolios. Smaller firms rely more on case-by-case approaches and manual monitoring. Again, not a shock because bigger firms have more resources. Now, I'd like to point out that Kroll does some curious things when they cut the data. A lot of their comparisons are between firms above $25 billion and everything below $25 billion lumped together. That's a massive range. $500 billion fund and a $20 billion fund end up in the same bucket. So the headline that bigger firms do it better is probably true, but that's not so useful if you're a $1 or $2 billion fund trying to figure out exactly what you should do. But when you read to the end, you're going to find something kind of interesting. The last substantive chart in the report asks PE executives what they expect over the next 12 months. And 96% agree that cybersecurity's importance will increase. 61% strongly agree. That's near universal consensus. But then look at the bottom of that same chart, because only 32% think their portfolio companies will face more sophisticated and targeted threats, and only 6% strongly agree. Literally 6%. So what are the other 94% thinking? That cyber risk is going to become more important, but the threats themselves won't actually get harder? That doesn't make a lot of sense, and I've been struggling to get my arms around it. There is a hint elsewhere that firms are still thinking about cybersecurity as a compliance problem. They're worried about regulatory exposure, audit findings, and insurance requirements, but they're not really thinking about whether their portfolio companies can actually survive a serious attack. Let me share what's actually happening in the threat landscape right now, because this is what the vast majority don't seem worried about. First one I'll point out is AI-powered social engineering. Attackers are using AI to clone voices and generate highly convincing phishing emails. There's groups like Scattered Spider. They're calling into help desks, impersonating employees, and getting password resets handed to them. There's no traditional cyber exploit, it's just a phone call. But they've shut down multiple major retailers last year using exactly this approach. Now imagine that call going into one of your portfolio companies. Second is ransomware-as-a-service. You no longer need to be a sophisticated hacker to deploy ransomware. There are off-the-shelf platforms that let low-skill attackers run double extortion campaigns. They encrypt your systems and threaten to leak your data. Mid-market companies are really ideal targets for this because they're valuable enough to pay a ransom, but they're often not well defended enough to stop the attack. The third are identity-based attacks. CrowdStrike's 2026 Global Threat Report found that 82% of detections last year involved no malware at all. Attackers are stealing credentials and simply logging in. Your traditional antivirus doesn't see this. If your portfolio company is relying on endpoint protection alone, then they have a significant blind spot. The fourth one, and this is a big one, is supply chain compromise. Major supply chain breaches have quadrupled over the past 5 years. Every SaaS vendor, every managed service provider that your portfolio companies use is a potential entry point. You can have perfect internal security and still get breached through a third party. Now, here's the link back to the Kroll data that I was mentioning. The number one form of financial impact that PE firms reported was increased compliance costs, 62%. So they're spending heavily on compliance. And compliance definitely matters. But compliance is just a baseline, and it's not a defense. Being SOC 2 compliant didn't stop Marks & Spencer from losing 4 months of operations. A self-assessment questionnaire doesn't tell you whether a portfolio company's Active Directory is exposed to the internet. Compliance tells you what a company says about its security posture, and it doesn't tell you what's actually there. This is the problem we built Atumcell to solve. Our proprietary AtomScan external vulnerability scanner and portfolio-wide dashboard give fund managers deep visibility into the actual security posture of every portfolio company. It's not what they report on a form, but what's actually exposed, what's actually vulnerable across the entire portfolio. Portfolio companies can dig into the detail and report remediations for verification, closing the loop and improving their real security. The threats facing portfolio companies in 2026 are real security issues, not a compliance problem. So if you're part of the 96% who agree that cyber risk is growing, but also part of the vast majority who don't think attacks are getting more sophisticated, you're not paying close enough attention to what's really going on. I'm Atumcell CEO David Williams. Check out atumcell.com to learn more and get a free cybersecurity vulnerability scan.